Hi there, my name's Tyler Genoy, and as I get the camera set up, I'll be telling you what I'm doing in this video today. I will be giving helpful tips on learning some things about the leg, such as blood supply, innervation, and the harder muscles of the posterior and anterior leg. So today I'm going to start out by explaining the blood supply and innervation because it's more simple and it'll help later when I'm talking about the muscles. So, with blood supply, the blood supply of the leg comes from your femoral artery. The femoral artery travels down the anterior thigh, then goes posterior through the adductor hiatus of the adductor magnus muscle, about right here in the supracondyle region of the femur. Once it travels posteriorly into the posterior knee, it becomes the popliteal artery. As it travels further down the posterior leg, it becomes the posterior tibial artery. Before becoming the posterior tibial artery, the popliteal artery gives off a branch called the anterior tibial artery, which travels through the proximal interosseous membrane of the leg to the anterior region of the leg. It travels anteriorly, then inferiorly down the leg to eventually become the dorsalis pedis artery of the foot. Now, I've seen two different sources saying that the anterior tibial artery comes from the popliteal or the posterior tibial artery. For safety's sake, I would just say that it comes from the popliteal artery. And this artery also supplies the anterior leg muscles with blood. Now, as the posterior tibial artery travels down the posterior leg, it gives a branch called the fibular artery, which travels kind of alongside it down the fibula to the plantar region of the foot. The posterior tibial artery travels to the plantar region of the foot through the flexor retinaculum of the medial side, along with the tendons of the posterior leg muscles and tibial nerve. And I'll get into detail with that more later in the video. So that's pretty much the blood supply of the leg. It's not that hard, it's really just 3 arteries. Now, with innervation, the innervation for your leg comes from the sciatic nerve, which travels down the posterior thigh into the posterior knee region, where it becomes the tibial nerve. The tibial nerve travels down the leg, sort of like this, and goes through the flexor retinaculum, as I mentioned earlier, with those other things. Now, before it gets into the knee region, another branch comes off it, about right here, called the common fibular nerve. The common fibular nerve travels inferiorly and anteriorly into the anterior region of the leg, about, let's say, right here. And once it gets into the anterior region of the leg, it bifurcates into your superficial and deep fibular nerves, which travel kind of like this. The deep travels sort of in front of the fibula and interosseous membrane to right here. And the deep fibular nerve actually supplies the anterior, or actually innervates the anterior leg muscles. That's pretty much it with the innervation. It's not too tricky, as long as you just get that the superficial and deep fibular nerves come from the common fibular nerve, which comes from the posterior part of the leg above the knee. All right, now we'll talk about some of the harder leg muscles to learn. For me, the most confusing were the deep posterior and the anterior leg muscles. And this is because the three on each side had the same names except for flexor for the posterior and extensor for the anterior. And you would think that that would make it simple, but unfortunately they do not come, or they're not in the same order posteriorly and anteriorly. Now, the only one that is the same is extensor and flexor hallucis longus, which both originate on your fibula and interosseous membrane of the anterior and posterior parts. That's the easy part. The hard part is the other two, which switch. Now, the way I try to remember it is by remembering which one is in the middle for posterior and anterior, and then working laterally and medially. For the anterior leg, the extensor digitorum longus is actually the one that's in the middle, and it travels, or it originates on the fibula, interosseous membrane, and tibia, and it's in the middle and travels kind of like this, with the extensor hallucis longus on this side and the tibialis anterior on this side. Now, on the posterior leg, these two flip. The tibialis posterior is actually in the middle and travels down into your flexor retinaculum underneath your medial malleolus, and your flexor digitorum longus is on the more medial side. So my tip to you guys is, when you're doing this, definitely position the flexor and extensor hallucis longus on the fibula and interosseous membrane, and just know that the extensor digitorum longus is in the middle on the front, and the tibialis posterior is in the middle on the back. Now, another confusing thing for people was the insertion of fibularis longus and tibialis anterior. The way it helped me remember it was that they have the same insertion, and they just kind of pull back and forth on each other, which rotates the leg. And they actually both insert on the medial cuneiform and base of metatarsal 1, or big toe. Yeah. All right. So another thing that I wanted to teach you guys was how the posterior leg muscles and the posterior tibial artery and tibial nerve pass through the flexor retinaculum into the plantar region of the foot. And I came up with an acronym for this, which is to fly past the farm. And this is in order of anterior, to posterior. All right. So I use the first letter for each one of these to represent the name of the tendon or nerve or artery that passes through it. So the most anterior is your tendon of tibialis posterior muscle. And the T for this represents tibialis. Next in the line of anterior to posterior is your tendon of I'm sorry, apparently I can't spell. Flexor digitorum longus muscle. And the F obviously stands for flexor. Next is your posterior tibial artery, P standing for posterior tibial. Next is the, which is tibial nerve, T obviously standing for tibial. And last but not least is tendon of flexor hallucis longus muscle, the F standing for flexor hallucis. And I know that these kind of don't match up, but this is a mnemonic that very much so helped me. And yeah, I hope this video is helpful. Thank you.